The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it. Great to be with you on a Tuesday. It's Hail Varsity. We're powered by Cornhead Lager, Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, and you. It is a good day Tuesday. The boot is off. The ankle, gotta work on it a little bit. Mistakenly did a mile on the treadmill last night.
How do you do that accidentally?
What I meant is I should have. I should not have done a mile. I didn't run. I hoppity clicked along with a weighted vest and I was just trying to gear up for crew. Next time he accosts me, lovingly, of course, at the gym when he's back in town. But in all seriousness, it is nice to wear two pair of shoes. You know?
I was gonna say, I've never accidentally found myself on a treadmill. There's never been one point in my life where I'm like, whoops, I didn't mean to hop on this treadmill, but now I'm here. I understand what you're saying.
Yes, saw the great folks at Nebraska Orthopedic, and they're like, dude, we don't need to see you again. Don't come back. No. So, yeah, the thumbs up was given, and now it's time to try and make the left lower part of my leg look like the right lower part of my leg again. So we'll get into plenty of football. Special Teams Day with Easy Ed Foley, Coach Foley with the media today. Micah Mazuka, impressive. We'll hear from Mr. Mazuka and kind of that edge he'll bring to the Nebraska offensive line. Pat McAfee going all in again on Matt Rule, and Mitch Sherman with us from The Athletic. In about 15 minutes or so, Mitch will join us and unleash the fury. In hour two, Husker Volleyball gearing up, and the voice of Husker Volleyball, John Baylor. Big Celtics guy, big Red Sox guy, big Montreal Expos guy. But JB will talk some volleyball. We might sneak in some football with JB as well. And then College Football Insider, 30 years of it. Brad Edwards going to join us, get Brad's take on what this playoff outlook could be year one for the SEC, the Big Ten, and some of the other leagues. 489-1240 to get in. 489-1240 or 800-825-5865. Toll free. Can email Chris at HailVarsity.com. And a couple of ways to watch the show or rewatch it. Hail Varsity YouTube. Like and subscribe there. And check us out on Twitter as well. Give us a follow at HVarsity Radio. You can find Elijah on Twitter at Herbal Essence. Myself, Chris Schmidt, at Schmidt_radio. We'll get our starting five shout-outs going. And also the folks that are in the stream that have some comments. But really good column by Tom Chattel in the World Herald in reference to Athletic Director Troy Dannon. What do you do if you're Nebraska in the future? And right now you're just kind of checking to see how things go. Are you punished or are you rewarded for your strength of schedule? It's built in being in the Big Ten. You're going to get good ball games. You're going to get games folks want to see. Those helmet games are going to appear 3, 4, 5 times a year if you're Nebraska because of your audience poll. You got to win some of those games, and you'll have a chance in November to make a statement. You'll have a chance week 2 in September against Coach Prime and the Buffs, and you'll have a chance against Ohio State end of October. There's a lot in between all of those, but Nebraska will draw eyeballs. How do you look? Are you fighting? Are you winning? Are you getting blown out, right? Nebraska fans hate being embarrassed on national TV and getting blown out in those air quote big ball games, those helmet games. But from a bigger league perspective, if you're Nebraska, do you continue on the track you have? In future years, you've done home and homes in the past with Oklahoma, with Colorado. You love it for the nostalgia and their big ball games. They're fun. But in the future, do you keep Tennessee? Do you keep Oklahoma? Do you keep Arizona on the schedule if you're going to get punished for it? Meanwhile, the SEC stuck at 8 conference games. Bigger picture conversation. Nebraska's, for many of us, not in that playoff conversation, although Andy Staples does ask a question, Elijah. Will the Iowa-Nebraska game have playoff implications? I think it absolutely could. Part of that is as good as Iowa is defensively in their schedule. And who knows, man? What if Nebraska gets hot? I'm not trying to waterboard you with Kool-Aid, Elijah. I'm just asking the question.
Well, I asked the same question during a sit-down I had with Big Red Junkies. That episode just dropped today. I asked the same question, like, what happens if that game does have playoff implications? Because you look at it, there's a real chance.
We're there anyway. I mean, you might as well make it a worthy adventure.
There's a real chance with what Iowa has on defense. It probably won't look pretty, but there's a real chance they could be an ugly 10-1.
Sure.
A rough and tumble, like 6 or 7 one-score games that we know Iowa has a tendency to come out on top in. They could be 10-1, and turn it around. If you have the Kool-Aid drinkers out there for Nebraska that seem to think that Nebraska could be 9-2 going into that game, if not 8-3.
What if that Iowa-Nebraska game? We're getting way too fast-forwardy here, but what if you're on the doorstep of you're at 8-3, Nebraska going into Iowa City? Let's just say. And then you pull off that 9th win. That puts you in the top 4 or 5 of the Big Ten.
Does that put you in college football playoff? Depending on who your wins are against, it puts you in the conversation.
Puts you in a big-time conversation.
But who are
your wins against, and how good did your losses look?
Well, and we're getting out over our skis, but I think it gets back to the non-conference discussion, where if you have a quality win in non-conference, let's say Colorado ends up being pretty good this year, which I don't think is, for as much as Nebraska fans have poo-pooed on Colorado, I don't think that's necessarily an unlikely thing that Colorado could be at least a bowling team this year.
They need to be a bowling team.
I mean, I could see that team finishing, you look at their schedule, 7-5, 8-4. It's possible. I think if some things break their way. I think it's also possible that they go 4-8. But
I think they could go 2-10, or they could go 6-6. It's kind of my window for the Buffs.
Anyway, I digress. Just saying, could that be a discussion point where, hey, if you have a premier non-conference win, let's say Nebraska in the future, I know they have future games scheduled against Tennessee. They have the home-and-home schedule. They have Cincinnati. Couldn't you totally see...
It's in Indy.
Can you totally see Nebraska just like scheduling the former Big 8 teams that currently reside in the Big 12 as being a non-conference game every single year?
I'd love K-State, Kansas, Missouri, but Nebraska's got to get to a point where you can beat those teams, right? And Nebraska at this point doesn't have to schedule to draw crowds. That was Colorado's thing for years, is they scheduled a ton of non-conference names. They'd play Miami, they'd play Texas, they'd play a lot of squads. This is Big 8 and even some Big 12 years. Nebraska would always kind of check out California, UCLA particularly, or Washington, the West Coast, just so you could have that type of presence. So let's get to the starting 5. We'll get single-digit shout-outs in a moment. Our single-digit shout-outs go like this. Justin is in. The other Dave is here. Uncle Jimmy is back in town. Arlo, formerly Broderick, is in. Dylan, good to have you. Dylan's back from the Black Hills. Sal is here. 9 on defense with single-digit jerseys. Defense is a beast. That's what Sal has to say in the stream. The real Matthew is here. Coach Brandon Kool-Aid is in. Jeff is here along with Aggressively Average. Let's have a Tuesday, boys. We hope to. Aggressively Average. Patrick here. Black Hills Brennan in. Tuck says what's up. A-Dub is here. Crazy Spider Adventures checks in along with KG. And Larry finding his way in. Moonbot says, howdy, nerds. Grateful Red is here. Walter says, bleep, see you.
He actually says bleep.
He does say bleep. I want to go golf with Walter. Walter sent a pic of him golfing in Jersey last weekend, or maybe the weekend before, that looked like an incredible course. Ronnie's here. Weston's here. Robert's in. Jack is here. Chris says, what's up? Anonymous is here. along with Cornhusker Cola. Love that name. Ryan checks in. Jacob is here, says LFG. NASCAR Eric finds his way in. Kent is here along with Ross. And Lemon Pepper Lou. Did y'all talk about Klatt yesterday? We didn't hit Klatt yesterday. That's a miss on our part. We usually talk about Klatt. Maybe he's asking, did you guys talk about Klatt again?
Was there anything from Klatt?
I didn't see anything pop up on my radar.
This is now, maybe we're doing a bad job around here. I don't remember Klatt saying anything.
Donald's here along with Rule of the Day. Anthony is here. We'll get to more of your comments in the stream. Many thanks to all of you. So let's dive into the single digits. Polar Bear, Jamari Butler, Giff, Marquise Buford, John Bullock, Tommy Hill, Cam Lenhart, and Mr. Singleton, along with Ty Robinson. Your lone offensive man is Jamal Banks, wearing number 4. So 9-1 the ratio. I have no problem with this. I think it's cool to see a true sophomore in Cam Lenhart make the list. You've got old guard. You've got an entire secondary, Elijah, for the most part, except that Oppo corner.
Oh, you might with Buford.
That's true. That's fair.
That's how I forecasted it. Is I saw 5 defensive backs out there.
Buford knocking down that Oppo corner spot in ink.
Is that what today? That's kind of how I took today. It's like, hey, if he's getting a single-digit number, I mean, he even got the shout-out from Matt Rule whenever Matt Rule talked about, I sleep good at night whenever I see those 5 out there, referring to the 5 that got single digits: Hill, Buford, Hartzog, Gifford, and Singleton. I think that's your 5.
Sure.
If Matt Rule gives the direct shout-out on Saturday and then you get all those guys in single-digit numbers, okay, I think maybe the discussion about who that opposite corner spot has been probably settled. That's my take on it.
No, they love Marquise Buford. Guy's pretty versatile. I'm excited for Giff with all he can do, along with Singleton back from injury. And, GBR Jeremy asked the question, who's going to step up as a leader of the offense? I think you've got your leader of the offense, and that's Jamal Banks, guy that is a transfer, but pretty mature guy. Is not only going to try and do big things and replicate what he did at Wake last year, all ACC first team. Think of that league and that league of receivers. But he's a guy that is going to lead a room. I mean, he is mentoring a group of sophomores and some freshmen that could be really, really special. And you saw some special play in Jalen Lloyd a year ago. You've got a talent that you want to tap into in Malachi Coleman, Carter Nelson. I mean, you've got guys that can be difference makers with a guy that can get him the football at quarterback. And no, you have your leader on offense. Now, let's go from this wide receiver leadership point, because you always want to have a leader. Yes, at quarterback for sure, goes without saying, but you need one on the offensive line, Elijah. And you have Ben Hart and you have Turner that have been there for 1,000 starts. You've got Scott, of course, at center. But Mazuka, the bravado, and to me that was something that kind of showed up. We've heard of Mazuka's impact and his talent. The guy's been at 3 major programs, but what's pretty cool about him is cut 5 here, what he brings to the offensive line. And you need that kind of crazy on the offensive line.
I just ain't scared of nobody. I don't really be saying there's good players out there, but I don't really be thinking like, oh, they got to deal with me. That's, you feel me? That's how I feel. And that's the attitude I want our line to have. They got to deal with us. We don't got to deal with them.
Some people call it crazy. Other people I call it nasty.
Yes, crazy is not a nice term for someone at 6'5", 325. You won't call him crazy to his face. I'm certainly not doing that over the airwaves. But nasty's the way to go. Mm-hmm. That dose of nasty.
It's like with Ben Scott last year. Mm-hmm. I think he ended up with 3 unnecessary roughness calls.
And some of those were in the ballpark of the Cam Jurgens, you shot put in some little dude.
None of them I was mad about. You need a little bit of nasty on your offensive line. An unnecessary roughness call here and there, does it set your offense back for a couple plays? Yeah, sure. Does it also send a message to the defense, set the tone a little bit? Mm-hmm. Something Nebraska's been lacking. Like, think about those 90s offensive lines. Nasty all across the board.
Sure.
Guys that you didn't want to go up against. Guys that after the first play of the game, you said, it's going to be a long day. That's what I think Mazuka can bring to this offensive line. And Scott brought it in little bits and pieces. I think he's going to be the vocal leader in that room this year, the guy that kind of steps forward. You've seen it in Chasing 3. You saw it by the fact that he was sent to Big Ten Media Days. I think that's your vocal leader, the guy that everybody listens to. I think the guy that sets the tone for your offensive line, that everyone goes, we need to play more like him. I think that could be Mazuka because he's shown it across multiple stops in college football. He will bring the nasty.
No, he'll bring the nasty. Does it stay controlled? And you need to get out of control once in a while, but don't cost your football team. Are
you going Raiola with your nasty? I'm referring to Dom here. Are you going Raiola with the nasty, or are you going incognito with the nasty?
There's a difference. You need Raiola nasty.
Exactly.
Unbiased Boxing Talk has a good word for what you want on your offensive line. We'll talk to Mitch Sherman about this. Unbiased Boxing Talk says edge. I say crazy. Elijah says nasty. Unbiased, you're right on with edge. So, Mitch Sherman going to bring the fury. Hail Varsity continues, powered by Cornhead Lager.
It's that time.
Psst. Hey, Mitch. Mitchie. We're looking for you, pal.
Mitch Sherman from The Athletic, talking Big Red.
Unleash the fury, Mitch.
Unleash the fury!
On Hail Varsity Radio.
So, correction on the single digit. Thank you, Ryan. It was Malcolm Hartzog, not Len Hart. So, the sophomore not in that single digit, but Cam will have a big season on the defensive line, presumably. Mitch Sherman's with us from The Athletic, at Mitch Sherman on Twitter, Locked On Nebraska. Catch his pod every morning. Can check that out on YouTube. Mitch, how we doing? Thanks for a few minutes.
I'm good. Did you guys think that Malcolm Hartzog was Cameron Lenhart?
I clicked his Twitter link on the Husker page, and that's where I screwed it up. So that was my bad.
More of a slip of the tongue.
Yes.
Cam's just a little larger than Malcolm.
No, yes.
At least it wasn't a visual. Good job.
Yes. So are we hammering pistachios? What are we eating? Ice?
No. You got to hear that? Yeah, I got some. We don't need to go there. I don't need to create a soundbite for you guys.
Well played.
That's how you know he's a pro. He thought about it and went, nope.
Mitch, that's good, man. Okay, so focus, and here we go. Take two. Mitch Sherman's with us.
Not eating anything.
not eating anything. Not on his roof.
Nope, it's all gone.
There we go.
What a way to start here.
That's good. So we're looking for a term to describe the offensive line represented by Mr. Mazuka. I said a little crazy. Elijah says nasty. Some of our streamers say edge. What word association are you going to pull?
So we're just talking about Mazuka here?
Yes.
Or the whole line? The whole line.
Give me Mazuka and what could he spread out to the O-line?
I just think Mazuka's a dude. Like we talked about that last week, not us, but I talked about that last week, and after watching practice on Tuesday, and I look at him, and so I kind of likened it to when Nebraska played Oklahoma a few years ago down in Norman, and it looked like Oklahoma had the physical edge at every position when you went 11 on 11 across the line of scrimmage. Like, it was somewhat frightening for Nebraska then on the first drive of the game because, yeah, it's like, okay, they have the edge there, they have the edge there, they have the edge there. And there was one player on the Nebraska offensive line where I said, all right, that one looks good for Nebraska. And that was Cam Jurgens. Okay. And that just the way that he played, and you see it now, he's in the NFL. that's Micah Mazuka. There is nobody that Nebraska is going to face this year. I don't care if it's Ohio State, USC, whatever, a 5-star. We're going to look across the line and go, well, Nebraska's going to get whipped in that matchup. The look is very strong. He's just a dude. He's the kind of guy that you want to have out there to intimidate an opponent. And if he plays anything like he looks, then he's going to bring the swag for Nebraska on the offensive line. He gives off a nasty vibe, that's for sure. And, we've heard some stories and seen some viral videos of him squaring up on the field when he was in a Florida uniform last year against Tennessee. Nebraska doesn't need that. They don't need 15 yards and a flag, but he brings attitude. There's absolutely no question about that, and he's going to benefit Nebraska as an offensive line if he plays in a disciplined way.
Mitch, I'm with you in that Nebraska doesn't need him squaring up on the field, but at the same time, is it one of those guys where a couple personal fouls, a couple unnecessary roughness this year, and you forgive him for it because that's just who he is?
Well, that was Cam Jurgens, right? Yeah. And he had a couple of those in his career. And sometimes it was just because he was playing too hard, like he was blocking too hard. And if it's like that, then yeah, sure. As long as you're not taking a first down away in a critical drive or something like that. Like if you're going to get a 15-yarder, you need to understand the situation and don't put yourself in a position to get it when it can really hurt the team in a critical moment.
Mitch Sherman with us, Hail Varsity Radio. Mitch with The Athletic, at Mitch Sherman on Twitter. But your impression, your takeaway here with the single-digit announcement?
Yeah, defense, huh? I'm not surprised to see Jamal Banks get one. I thought that they might go with the quarterback, but they're withholding the suspense there. And look, talking to Matt Rule or listening to Matt Rule on Saturday, I think all of us out here in the public and the media are more concerned and thinking more about the announcement at quarterback and what it's going to be and the anticipation and look, here comes Dylan, it's his time, than they are inside the program. And I think that's evident in the way that this vote went down. This is a team vote where you end up with the 10 players who received single digits. And really they were just voting on 5 this year because the 5 who were back from last year, all on the defensive side, retained their spots. So you had 5 to determine, and 4 of them went to defensive players. And I think it's just a reflection on what Nebraska players feel like they've got in that defensive line. So one defensive line starter, Jamari Butler, didn't have one. He was on, I think the defense and the entire team felt like, well, Jamari's on par with Hutmaker and Robinson, so he deserves one too. And then the same thing in the secondary where they gave 3 new single-digit jerseys to Hartzog and Buford and who am I forgetting here? Tommy Hill. So those guys are every bit as deserving as Singleton and Isaac Gifford. So 5 defensive backs out of the 10 on the team. That says a lot about where I feel like John Butler has gotten this group to in a short period of time with him as an assistant coach. With
9 of your 11 defensive starters wearing single digits, Mitch, do you even need to give out black shirts this year, or does the single digit just cover it?
We know who the black shirts are. I mean, the question has been answered. You're going to give one to Makai Bayer as an inside linebacker, and then maybe there's a decision to be made at jack linebacker between MJ Sherman and Princewell. Perhaps they both get one, or they just go with. I don't know which one of those two. That's one of the few positions on the team where you either at a number 1 or a number 2 spot where I feel like there's a little bit of suspense on who the starter might be. Obviously, running back is the number 1 position right now where it's just kind of up in the air, at least in my view. But jack linebacker is also there, and that's really the only air of suspense that's left as far as the black shirts go.
Mitch Sherman's with us. Mitch, the lone offensive rep, Jamal Banks. What kind of impact in that locker room do you think Banks has made? Yes, the vote's there, but just specifically bringing along a young receiving group.
Mm-hmm. We're just starting to figure out what he's all about here. Maybe several months after his teammates did, because the talk about Jamal Banks going back to January. When he arrived, it was like day one, he was a leader in terms of holding teammates accountable and understanding the expectation, like taking it up a level from where Nebraska was at when he arrived. Like, he was instrumental in this offseason from the get-go, being more productive and more effective than what last offseason was. And that's exactly what Matt Rule and his staff were looking for when they went out and sought a transfer at that position, because all the players coming back, or the majority of the players coming back, were young. And they needed somebody, as Satterfield said last week, they needed a couple of big brothers. And, Banks led the way, and then Isaiah Nayor, I think, has picked it up. I mean, he's every bit as physically impressive as Jamal Banks. They're both listed at 6'4", 220 pounds. They give you a little bit something different in terms of their skill set. I think Banks is the ultra-reliable guy who's going to always run the right route, like be the quarterback's best friend. And then Nair is a guy who can go the distance if he breaks a tackle. And he's obviously got the physicality to be able to break a tackle if he's being covered by a safety or a linebacker or whoever it is, certainly a corner. So they both add a lot. And Banks is I think the clear choice when you're looking at a wide receiver or really anybody on the offense. I mean, again, Thomas Fidone would be deserving, but Fidone plays a position where maybe if you're thinking about putting a tight end in that group, like it's split between some teammates. Like, is Fidone the leader of that group? Is Nate Borkerture the leader of that group? Much like the situation at running back, where I think there's three good leaders at that position, but really you might talk to three players and three teammates, and each one of them would say a different guy. You might have one say Ramir Johnson, one say Emmett Johnson, one say Gabe Irvin.
Mitch, do you think Nebraska has in Banks a guy that is the leader of the offense as a whole? Because I want to compare it to the defensive side of the ball with Gifford. You see it in chasing three. You see it at the podium. I think he's pretty unquestionably like the guy that the rest of the defense turns to. Even the other leaders listen up whenever Isaac Gifford speaks. Does Nebraska have that guy offensively?
No, I don't think that's Jamal Banks. I mean, they're different personality-wise, and some of it is that Isaac Gifford has been a part of the Nebraska football program for like a decade. I mean, when his brother joined the Huskers, he kind of brought Isaac along for the ride, even though he was just a kid in high school, and I think he's felt like that for a long time. And he's a fifth-year senior now, so he's very invested and has a ton of equity in the program. And I mean, you've heard his personal story about how Luke couldn't come back after the coaching change, the year after the coaching change, and finish the business that he started in 2018. And it was a motivating factor for Isaac to make that decision that he did after last season. I mean, Jamal Banks has got none of that going on. He's a guy who's here and trying to improve himself and be a good teammate and get to the NFL and end his college career on a good note. But he does have the personality side of it. I mean, it's a high character guy who, like I said, has big time accountability that he holds his teammates to. I think he's a natural leader. He is not as outspoken and as in your face. I don't mean physically in your face. That's not how I would describe Isaac Gifford, although I think he could be. But like the way that he presents his words, it's kind of it can be, he will impose those words on teammates if needed. He's not making any apologies, for getting on somebody. And that Banks is from my chats with him, a little more diplomatic, but his point is well taken. And like when you hear what he has to say, he definitely gets his point across. I think he's extremely well respected, not just on the offense but across the team, and that's shown by this vote that was revealed today. But he's a different kind of leader, I think, than what the defense has in Isaac Gifford.
Mitch Sherman with us from The Athletic. Catch him on The Athletic at Mitch Sherman on Twitter, and the Locked On Nebraska pod. Be sure to give that a listen. Mitch, we'll see you a little later in the week. Thanks for a few minutes today, bud.
Okay, thanks, guys. Take care.
Hail Varsity Radio is live. Now, back to Schmitty.
Schmitty's a great guy, but he don't have a brain.
And Elijah.
You want me to speak? When I point you, yeah.
On Hail Varsity Radio.
Big thanks to Mitch Sherman. Be sure to get the podcast downloaded. Spotify, iTunes, Google Play with Hail Varsity Radio at HVarsity Radio on Twitter. Like and subscribe on YouTube as well. And check out all the family of Hurrdat Sports podcasts. We'll hear from Easy Ed Foley and the punt return topic and kicking game here in a moment. But old Pat McAfee, of course, Rule was on Jim Rome yesterday talking about the Big Ten being NFL-like. He's said that before. And Trevor has checked into the stream. The Golden Fang has also said Micah the Moose Mazuka, given him the nickname there. Or the Mauler, Micah the Mauler Mazuka, ready for a future in WWE. That's from Sergeant Vegas 702.
Why go complicated when Mazuka the Bazooka right there?
Or just Bazooka.
Oh yeah, just Micah Bazooka.
Yeah, Mr. Bazooka. But
McAfee, not the best name actually.
Yeah, we'll work on the nickname thing. We'll call Costanza up. And go that route. But McAfee dove in here. Did you preview this? I thought what I sent you, I thought was clean.
Did I preview it like listening active ears?
Yeah.
Kind of not really, but I also think it was clean.
Okay.
We have a dumb button if necessary.
Okay, let's roll the dice. And Pat McAfee. Everyone's screaming right now. Pat McAfee on Matt Rule. He's all in, man. He was all in when he had Rule on a couple of weeks ago. And I actually checked that end of July for Big Ten Media Days, the Monday before. But Mac on Rule.
Friend of the program, head coach Matt Rule. We showed a video of him talking to the team last week where he was holding them accountable and asked them a lot of questions on whether or not we want to win or lose. We got an insight into why Matt Rule has been such a successful college football coach. And, you wonder how the team responded to this. How did the team buy in? Well, now we're getting video out of Nebraska Cornhusker training camp. They're bought in. Nebraska is tight right now, and Matt Rule is the man.
If I miss it, you guys don't have to run. If I make it, you run.
If I miss it, you don't have to run. This is normally on a field goal kicker. Instead, it's Matt Rule golfing.
Look how good he looks, too.
And listen to the whole team. Boom. Throws phone, one-handed grab by player. They're all seeing the same damn picture. Backflip. Walk off. Get your ass on the line.
Don't ever come at me again. Everybody at once. Hey, one rep. Run it like you need it. Run it like you want to win. One rep.
So that was Matt Rule last night's chasing three. And Sat took a swing. Rule's son took a swing and nailed it. And then Rule got it between the uprights with the golf ball and the dreaded wedge for some of us. Pressure moment. Coach coming through, and Mac wanted to reward it.
Could you hit that shot in that moment?
I hit that shot on the back nine last Sunday. No, I did.
Through goalposts?
No, not through a goal. There were enough trees where I was playing. Yes. Yes. Forgot my chainsaw. But no, I could have hit that. I mean, I've hit that shot before with 100 guys around me screaming. No.
Okay.
Someone would have gone to the hospital and needed stitches. I would have sliced it and diced them.
Which club are you pulling out for that shot? It appeared to be 30 yards, about 90 feet.
No, wedge.
Taking out the wedge?
Mm-hmm.
You don't feel confident about your ability to... I might go 9-iron because I feel better about my 9-iron's ability to go straight than my wedge.
Well, if it's 30 yards, it's kind of the wedge thing.
Well, yeah, but you're not landing it on the goalpost. You're trying to get it through.
I get it. Well, if we're just talking, what am I going to hit straight? Probably my 8.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. Like, which club are you most confident in that it's going to go straight where you want it to go? I'm going 9.
Fine. That's good. 9 would be a great number for Nebraska to average on punt returns. That's almost a first down.
I'm not going to let you. That was a great transition, but
I hope. I try.
That was good.
Can I hear from Easy Ed Foley? Hot dogs and nacho cheese. Dude's incredible. Loves the state of Nebraska. Special teams needs to make a jump. He was asked today about what he thought about last year's aggressiveness when it comes to the punt return game. Cut 7.
Terrible. It's terrible. It falls directly on me. So I needed to do a way better job this year than I did last year with that whole unit from top to bottom. The punt returner is certainly part of that. Having the injury situations that we had. You understand that IGC was the backup last year, and then Billy got hurt. So but the way that came down, we got to do a way better job. We got to come out of the games with an advantage in the net. When you look at the punters, like if we're gaining 40 yards a punt, then this is a Tom Osborne thing, right? So Tom wanted to. And we want to gain 40 yards on a punt, and we want to have 30 yards that they're gaining on the punt because of the combination of pressure on the punter and returns that we're going to have. So the formula that Coach Osborne, set up years and years ago is still very valid today for us. So we have to win. That's a must for us, and that's a goal that Coach and I have been talking about. We've been talking about it since last December. So we have got to do a better job with that.
It goes without saying, right? I mean, Nebraska needs to be a threat in the return game. Newcomb threat, DPE threat. Do they have that guy? Can IGC be him? Possibly. You've also got Barney as an option in the return game. Elijah, what do you predict? I think Nebraska is going to continue to emphasize. I think the punt return game can be solid, and you can maybe even have some moments of spectacular. IGC is going to be that grizzled vet back there, and he wants to make a difference. He's been through hell and back with injuries, and he's been in college a while, so make an impact that way. Be in the receiver room, yes, but be a impact dude returning the punts. And then, Barney is possibly special with that athleticism, the balance, the shiftiness. With him and Ramir and Emmett as kick return options. We're talking punt now, but why not give yourself a shorter field when it comes down to it?
And what's your take? Do you think Nebraska houses one this year?
They need to.
It's been since J.D. Spielman. Isn't that wild?
That is wild.
I'm pretty sure you have to go back to 2019, the last time.
I can. Johnny the Jet's the GOAT, clearly, but you go back to Newcomb, Irving Fryer, Dana Brinson,
DPE, a little.
DeMornay was incredible. Dejan Gomes. No, hold on. Dejan Gomes was a safety. DeJuan Gross is who I meant from the early 2000s. He house went against that unreal Miami team in the Rose Bowl.
I remember Nate Swift being a pretty good punt returner.
Swifty was money.
Amir housed to kick for a touchdown.
He did. Joe Walker won Oklahoma State, Nebraska, and Arrowhead. Nebraska had a dude back there that could just flip the game for you. So find somebody, let them go do their thing.
And I wish I had the stat off the top of my head, the percentage of games that you win whenever you return a kickoff or a punt for a touchdown. Your winning goes up exponentially.
It's huge. Walter off the top rope with some reality. Nebraska averaged 3 yards per punt return last year. We'll wind down hour one.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
We'll chat some volleyball and some Husker football thoughts. John Baylor, voice of Husker Volleyball, coming up here in 10 minutes. Brad Edwards, college football insider, long time with ESPN's got his own pod now. And we'll check in on the playoff outlook, thoughts on Nebraska, some of the new teams in the Big Ten, and that dreaded showdown between the SEC and Big Ten for 12-team playoff spots. So last saw it here from Coach Ed Foley with kicking, right? Close ball games. Nebraska, as we talked about a week ago, going to be per FPI in 8 one-score games this year. Is that 7? Is that 3? Well, the theme is chasing 3, and you've got Alvano still battling back. You've got John Hull has emerged, 3 kickers fighting for it. Nico's the third. But it's always a competition. Even if Alvano is healthy, you have a fight for that spot. Cut 2, Here is Ed Foley.
It's always a competition to me, and the thing about the kicker is it's quantifiable. So, like, we can do the percentages. I don't really want to go into those percentages with you right now, but they're close. It's really close, and they're making most of their kicks, which is good. So both guys are making a lot of kicks, so it's. But we're going to let that thing kind of take another couple days.
Let's squeeze in one more on the punt return. I meant to get to this last segment, and this is Foley on IGC in the return game.
We got IGC, as the punt returner, and Jacory's really done a good job in terms of tracking, and we're putting Jacory and Emmett Johnson into situations now where they've got to make decisions with things like poison and doing things down around the goal line, which is a little different. When the ball's down around the goal line, there's different decisions that need to be made. I would say IGC is probably a little bit ahead in terms of the decision making, but I'm personally comfortable, and Coach and I were talking about it the other day, and just how do we going to manage that moving forward. But I would not be surprised to see both of those guys returning punts for us. Both of those top two guys, and Emmett can do it too. All three of those guys really are guys that I think can go in a game and return punts for us. And I think that puts us in a better situation than we were last year. And when Emmett was good last year, but with the situation that we had at running back after that catastrophic week, he wasn't a guy that he was spending a lot of time doing other things. So I feel good about those guys out there.
Elijah, they've got a lot of options at a lot of spots this year. I mean, and they're comfortable with it. It's the depth that has been harped on has been accumulated, and now get guys ready to go. And if you're not the starter, well, you're a play away from maybe being the starter.
Well, I think having options, having guys that are ready to go, I think that raises your floor. But you got to have those standouts too. Like, it's great to have a guy back there on a punt return that can average 10 yards per return on the season. That's a fantastic number for a punt returner. But, like, do you have that standout that can make a guy or two miss and take it 60 yards, take it to the house? Do you have a guy as a kickoff return specialist that, hey, the other teams are scared whenever you go 40. Out there? Like, yeah, you start at the 40, or you house a punt, or house a kick, I should say, and completely change the game. Can you have a standout? That's just not just special teams. It's across the entire board, because that's what's going to start raising the ceiling is whenever you get those standouts, those future NFL guys, those special athletes, as opposed to just having options is great, don't get me wrong, but where are the standouts that make your job easy as a coach?
Reminder to get buckled up. Use your seatbelt. It saves lives, prevents injuries only if properly worn. Make it click. A message from the NDOT Highway Safety Office. John Baylor kicks off Hour 2 next.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Back with you, it's Hour 2. It's Hail Varsity, powered by Cornhead Lager. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. And we welcome in the voice of Husker Volleyball. You hear Husker Volleyball, of course, on AM 590, proud affiliate. John Baylor, at _John Baylor on Twitter. JB, it is a pleasure. It is an honor. How are you?
Schmidt, Elijah, very fired up. Happy Tuesday. I love the brief interruption in all the Husker football talk. A slight examination of Husker volleyball. It's that time of year again. The whole season gets rolling Saturday night, and then Tuesday night, the regular season. So I'm fired up.
I know you are ready to go. Sunday, of course, the Nebraska documentary set to air on ESPN, E60, No Place Like Nebraska. That is going to be incredible, and Nebraska was able to really be featured with unprecedented access to a team that was just right there for a championship. And, JB, you've been around Coach Cook and Nebraska teams. I mean, the standard is to play for a title. That's a lot of pressure, but this team never seems to blink. This program doesn't blink. What's that been like for you?
Oh, an honor. I love it. They keep me young, and have a box seat to the greatest show on Terraflex. Count me in. And one reason I love it so much is I like winning. Winning is fun. Winning is underrated, and there's a lot of it. You got 6 Final Fours in the last 9 years, and in that stretch you had 2 national championships. So it's been what I call the golden age of Nebraska volleyball. But, yeah, this is one of the best gigs going, if you ask me. I mean, there are plenty more lucrative gigs and more prestigious gigs in this profession, but I can't imagine many more that are this much fun.
I hear winning. I hear unflinching. Are those the same words that you would use to describe Schmidt's golf game?
No.
Schmidt's golf game is full. It's rife with untapped potential. This guy, he could easily shave 20 strokes off his game, which is good news and bad news. It's kind of like when I get that compliment on my game. Boy, JB, you've got a really nice swing. Translation, why don't you score better? Anyway, so a lot of opportunity there, untapped for Schmidt on the links.
I was telling Elijah, I mean, JB, the way you swing your club, I mean, it's like you know the 3-2 fastball's coming. You put every ounce of angst, frustration, anger into you. Pound that golf ball, dude. You hit it straight. It's like it's a line drive.
I got to calm down. As my daughter, who is a college golfer, tells me often, Dad, you're not good enough to be upset. You got to earn that anger. So I try to stay calm and enjoy myself. But no, it's one of the golf is so nonlinear. It's just amazing how much time so many people put into something where progress is so elusive.
You said it best. John Baylor with us. We'll get back to volleyball. We may sneak in some football and Celtics, maybe some Expos history as well. But John Baylor with us here on Hail Varsity Radio @_John Baylor, voice of Husker Volleyball. JB, your outlook for this year with what's back. I was looking at some of the media session with Merritt Beeson, Harper Murray, and just that bond, this team's bond. How does it translate for 2024?
Well, expectations have never been higher, and anything less than a national championship will at least be a modest disappointment. You got 6 seniors, you got everybody back who matters. They lost 4 players, but they all left for the most part because they were going to continue at best this year to be part-time. So, and then you add Taylor Landfair from the transfer from Minnesota, who 2 years ago was the Big Ten Player of the Year, 4.3 kills a set, hit more than 250. I mean, so you're just adding more firepower. But you get Bergen year 2 as your setter, and she was so smooth last year as a freshman. So barring a sophomore slump, now your quarterback's even better. First-team All-American, Merritt Beeson on the right. You got 3 fabulous middles, and Andy Jackson, I don't know how you sit her down. She's probably the greatest athlete, or certainly one of them in the history of the program. She's got basically a 10-foot, 10-inch touch point. She can dunk a basketball. I mean, and she's gone to a whole nother level this summer, my understanding, playing with the under-21 national team. And then on the outside with Taylor Landfair joining, I mean, Lindsey Krause is still going to have to fight for playing time. This is one of the most decorated volleyball players in the history of the state. 4 straight state championships at Omaha Scott. And for 4 years, she's been trying to find her place on the floor, and part of it was injury. She's snake-bitten last year, but you just can't help but root for her because she's such a great talent. She's such a warrior, and let's hope she gets that Hollywood ending she so deserves with her 4th and final year. And you got Harper in the mix, and she's the freshman of the year in the conference on the left side, and Skylar Pierce wants to get out there, and she's the number 4 recruit in the country, and the back row is so strong, but they're talking about not even redshirting Olivia Malk anymore coming out of Bennington. She's like gravity's worst enemy. She's keeping the ball off the floor. So when you're seeing that kind of talent, top to bottom on the roster, you're thinking great depth. But the downside is how do you keep everybody happy? Because on other programs, every other program except for 5 or 6 in the country, these are all featured performers. And here at Nebraska, except for the setter and the libero and the right side, they're fighting for time.
John, you talk about the fact there are 5 or 6 other teams in the country that have a wealth of talent as well. That's the top of the volleyball world right now. When you look at the schools, I mean, Texas, you saw the talent that they put on display in the national championship game. And Andy Jackson was asked about that national championship game a couple of days ago. I was wondering if you caught this. I thought it was interesting where she's asked, does the team use that loss as motivation going into this year? And the heart of her answer was, Yeah, I mean, it's always going to stick with you, the fact that you lose that, but also it's in the past, so you got to move on and keep on moving forward. What was your take on that answer in terms of using the national championship loss as motivation?
I think it's accurate. Of course it's motivating. They were humbled, you know. A lot of politicians say they're humbled when they're elected. Well, I hope not, because humbled in its true sense means you've discovered a shortcoming you didn't know existed. Well, they were humbled in a genuine sense, and to a team that was better on that day. Nebraska in that first set and the first third of the second set were highly competitive. It was a toss-up, and then thereafter we just saw a side of Nebraska we hadn't seen all season. Suddenly the unveiling of the passing woes, really became visible. So that was a very humbling end of the season. So it can go two ways. It can be motivational for the whole year, or secondarily, it can be kind of a seed of doubt. Sure, we can pound on a lot of teams, but if we were to run into the burnt orange again, which basically has the same lineup that they did last year, will the outcome be different? And I like our chances, but that was a really difficult end to 2023.
JB, you mentioned just a moment ago the feature on a lot of other teams. The norm in Lincoln is you've got to fight and scrap for playing time on a loaded roster. Tell me about the management of Coach Cook and how it all works and how it all coexists.
It's an inexact science, but he is like a fine wine. He just keeps improving with time, and he's always been the master motivator, but he's just getting better every year, and somehow he keeps them happy. Now, that's a tough task, and it's increasingly tough when you're just loaded at every position. The easier coaching jobs are like 2008, where you only got 7, 8, 9 players. It's real easy to manage. It's Jordan Larson and the Miracles, and suddenly they're right there in the national semifinals, and they got Penn State on the ropes, a Penn State team that year that had not lost a set, forget about an entire match. But now you've got every single week to try to figure out, okay, who's most deserving, who's going to play, and how to keep them happy. What's amazing is this is nothing new for him, and for the last, since 2015 at least, the chemistry has been remarkable. And so he's figured it out. Of course, when you're always recruiting the top athletes, you're going to have defections. In an NIL and especially transfer portal era, you're going to have people leaving every year. The key is not to have any of your key contributors leave, and I can't think of a single one that has thus far since the portal started.
It's John Baylor with us here talking some Husker Volleyball on Hail Varsity Radio. And John, as you look ahead to the start of the season, you have the red-white match on Saturday. Kentucky comes to town next Tuesday. Just looking early in the season, what unanswered questions do you want to see get answered in the first couple weeks of the season?
Oh, all right. Who's gonna start in the middle? You got Layla Blackwell, who just joined the team. She's was on the Final Four team for University of San Diego 2 years ago. Or is it going to be Rebecca Alex? I mean, Rebecca Alex is the heart and soul of this team. She went to Waverly High School, grew up in Lincoln. Her brother played on the basketball team. I mean, she's going to be featured in this E60 ESPN documentary. I mean, somebody's got to sit. And so that's question number one, is how close is that competition? And then on the outside, I mean, Skylar Pierce did not accept Nebraska to watch for a year. I mean, the days of the redshirting, those are quaint, days. I mean, you just can't ask elite athletes to redshirt anymore. I'm a huge fan of the redshirt because what you're, of course, doing is trading your worst year for your best when you redshirt. But convincing an 18-year-old when the transfer portal is swinging wildly to take a year off and watch is very unusual. And Caroline Juravicius did it last year, and we thought we'd have her for 4 years. She'd probably be a 3-year All-American, and she decides at the end of the year, well, I watched for 1 year, didn't burn any eligibility, but now it looks like with Merritt Beeson still ahead of me on the right side, I'm going to have to largely watch for a second year, and that persuaded her to go to her father's alma mater at Penn State. She's probably going to be a 4-time All-American. She's that good. So, you just who's going to be chosen on the outside? Now, the last 3 or 4 years, the two outsides who began the year weren't the same two that started the end of the year. So there'll be some change. It's a 30-plus match season, but where are they at this point in this open competition with these elite athletes at the middle and on the left side? And then also I take a peek at the back row. Laney Choboy, one of the smallest Huskers of all time, 5'2", 5'3", maybe, is a fabulous digger. She struggled a little bit passing into last year. And how much has she progressed, and how close is Olivia Mauk, who, again, is just turning heads with her passing and digging ability out of Bennington. So a lot of competition. Will be a lot of fun to watch. An area where you can kind of count on the players being there to start the season, probably the whole year, and certainly Saturday night. Merritt Beeson on the right, Lexi Rodriguez in back, your two captains, and then Bergen Riley, your center.
John Baylor's with us, voice of Husker Volleyball, Hail Varsity Radio, @_John Baylor on Twitter. Of course, you hear JB on AM 590, Husker Volleyball coverage. JB, going to wind down here and get a football question. I know you like the Big
All
Red.
Right.
How you feeling about year 2 of Rule?
Optimistic. But here's the bad news. I've felt optimistic many years in the past. But this year, I'm feeling really authentically optimistic. No, you've got someone who every time he talks, you just want to put on some pads yourself and start, hitting a blocking sled. I mean, he's just a great motivator, and he's detail-oriented. It just feels like we've got adults in charge. And this is a highly competitive business called college football. And we've just got people who attend to the details and do all the little things. I mean, my understanding is they've really reconnected with the coaches across the state. Just lots of positive signs. Now, will it finally translate into victories? And here's the biggest thing. The guy has basically saved an extinct species. It looks like Coach Rule has preserved the fullback. And that makes me extremely excited. I'm a big RTB guy. Run the ball.
Yeah. Well, they got a quarterback possibly that can throw the football, but a run game that will complement. If you're going all-time JB favorite fullback, is it Schlesinger? Is it Franklin? Is it Rathman? Is it Roger Craig that senior year, or is it a Makovica?
Which one? They were both solid fullback. Wasn't it just great, though? It seems like they had bigger pads than everybody else, and they just ran over people. And opponents for Nebraska used to be sore for another game. Like a loss to Nebraska usually had a carryover the next week because everyone was just so sore because the linemen were bowling them over, and then here comes Makovica with the bye. I love it. How about Tom Rathman? He wore eye black better than anybody.
That he had the Eastern Russian buzz cut, the Drago tribute, pre-Drago.
I think Rocky VI, it's Rathman versus Sly.
I'll just say, while we're talking fullbacks here, let's not forget about Andy Janovich.
No, we got to get Jano. Yeah, we can't forget Jano.
I was going to say the pride of Gretna, right?
Yes, big time pride of Gretna.
I was searching for his name. He was great. Underutilized. How is it I can't even remember his name because you're in Nebraska. I learned he was a great Denver Bronco. That's about what I know. Underutilized. Come on.
Big time.
RTB, run the ball.
Here, JB, all season long, Husker Volleyball, their quest for another championship for Coach Cook. And catch, of course, the E60 doc Sunday at 4 on ESPN. We'll have more on that later in the week. JB, we love you. We appreciate you much, and thanks for a few minutes.
Feelings are mutual, and love that 590 signal. If you're driving through Albuquerque right now, you love 590.
JB, you take care, bud.
You too.
There he is, John Baylor with us here on Hail Varsity Radio. That is so good. If you're driving through Albuquerque. We'll dive in and talk some Nebraska, some college football playoff. What does this 12-team era mean? Brad Edwards on the way.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back into it. It's Hail Varsity, powered by Cornhead Lager. Let's talk some college football And say hi to Brad Edwards, College Football Insider. Find him on Twitter at @JBradEdwards, Gridiron and Gospel Podcast. And, of course, his book, Dynasty by the Numbers. Brad, the 12-team playoff is here. Year 2 of Matt Rule. Change in Bama. We got a whole lot of ground to cover. How you doing? I'm doing well, man. Good to talk to you again. And this is going to be a college football season like nothing that we've ever witnessed. And I'm not saying that because I know what's going to happen or pretend to know, what the outcome is going to be. But there are just so many things about this that are just completely different. And looking forward to seeing how it plays out. Well, we'll try and dust our crystal ball off with some thoughts as well. But I want to get started off with you've been around in your career, college football playoff and selection committee, and with the expansion to 12. Put your playoff cap on and tell me how you think things will shake out, specifically with strength of schedule. And I bring that up because there are teams that have some tougher non-cons in the SEC and in the Big Ten. But, is it reward or punishment if you don't win those ball games? How do you think that outlook's going to be this first year? Yeah, I think one of the fascinating things to see in this first year is to what degree do the Big Ten and SEC get benefit of doubt that maybe some conferences wouldn't have gotten in previous years. And I say that because you've had this influx of more depth, I guess is probably the better way to say it, quality depth, in that you have teams like obviously Oregon, USC, Washington, who was in the national championship game a year ago, even though they are significantly weakened from what they were. You've got those teams that are coming in. You have in the SEC, Texas and Oklahoma coming in. So, is there going to be this assumption on the part of the selection committee that, hey, a 3-loss team in one of those conferences, may be better than a 1-loss team in, say, the Big 12 or the ACC. Of course, this is something that we know in the 4-team model that assumption would not have been made. But here in year 1, is it possible that could take place? I have a theory that as we get further and further into this, that the lines are going to get blurred, and I think people in the committee are going to forget to some extent or either start to ignore the fact that these two conferences are really stronger than the others. And maybe that's the big question, is like, if you're on the committee, are you looking at it as the power 2 and then the next 2 and then everybody else? Or are you looking at it as a power 4? And I think that's really what it comes down to, is are you going to see almost all of the large spots come from the Big Ten and the SEC, or are you going to see possibly the ACC and the Big 12 get what some might consider more than their fair share?
It's Brad Edwards with us here. And Brad, do you feel that the SEC and the Big Ten are miles ahead of the other conferences? Where do you think that conversation is at? Because there are going to be some chances for those teams, Big 12, ACC, early in the season to show, hey, we're going toe-to-toe with the Big Ten team, or we're going toe-to-toe with an SEC team. What do you think that differential is like right now? Yeah, and I think those opportunities for them are going to be crucial to really show that they deserve, to have consideration, that they are maybe closer to those leagues than people imagine. I think the ACC and the Big 12 are a little bit different in that in the ACC, you do have at least a couple of teams, one being Florida State, which obviously was one of the top teams in the country last year, and if they hadn't lost their quarterback, certainly would have been in the playoff. And then Clemson, who, it hasn't been that long since Clemson was one of the best teams in the nation. And that's not really something that you can say for any of the teams in the Big 12. In fact, TCU is the only current Big 12 member that has won a playoff game, and I believe Cincinnati is the only other one that's even been in a playoff game. And so I think
I think that if it's one of those two teams or someone else like a Miami, right, that has a name that I believe the selection committee is going to give more legitimacy to the top teams in the ACC by default than they would the teams in the Big 12, which, for the most part have not been there before. And so that's kind of the way I look at it, where I think there's a better chance that the ACC gets a second team in than the Big 12. But I think it also depends on, what these teams do out of conference, and I think it also depends on who it is. Because, if it's Louisville that wins the ACC, then I think all bets are off as far as, how much credibility the conference has.
Brad Edwards with us here. Some college football thoughts. Hail Varsity Radio. I'm torn right now on an old rival, and that is Oklahoma, with what they've lost, what they have, and the move they're making. Texas has been playing at an elite level and building, so I think their transition won't be easy, but they're maybe a little more apt to make it and still be on that playoff spot. Oklahoma, their schedule's not easy, and there's maybe some question about what kind of firepower they can have offensively. How do you think Oklahoma's first year of hazing will be in the SEC?
Yeah, that's a great question because you look at let's just look at the preseason polls. Actually, I'm going to try to pull it up in front of me while we're talking. And look at the number of SEC teams. Now, granted, look, to a certain extent, everybody's guessing, right? We all recognize that. But if you start going down there and you see Oklahoma sitting there around, 16. I guess they're 16 in both polls right now. On one hand, that's lower than we're used to seeing Oklahoma in the preseason in recent years. They typically are a top 10 team. But you look at it from just the depth of the conference, and you can see, like, ahead of them, you've got Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Missouri, LSU, Tennessee. I kind of lost count. I think Oklahoma's maybe the 8th team. And they're 16th overall, but they're the number 8 team in the conference. And so, obviously, if they finish as the 8th best team in the conference, or anywhere close to that, they're not going to be ranked 16th at the end. And I think that's the big question is, once you start taking a third loss and then a fourth loss, and whether this is Oklahoma or anybody else, what does that do to the perception of how good you are? Now, look, we all know you could be, with a schedule like Oklahoma has and like most of the teams in the SEC have, you could be 8-4 having lost 3 really close games to top 15 teams and still have a very good case that you are a top 15 team. But the committee, I can't speak for the committee, but I know the polls in a normal situation are not going to rank you there if you have the 4th loss. So I think that's really the big question that's facing all of them is, like, how many losses can you really afford? Because you could legitimately be one of the top 15 to 20 teams in the country with that type of schedule and end up 7-5. I think it doesn't necessarily say that you're not very good. But look, as Nebraska fans know very well, there's something to being able to win the close games. And if you're going to be in a lot of them in a league like this, especially the teams that are battling, for the top. And if you're not winning the close games, then it completely changes everything. And I think that's where my question is with Oklahoma. Do they have what it takes on both sides of the ball in order to play that type of schedule and to be able to, not drop several games along the way? And I think there's a reason that they're considered the 8th best team in the SEC by the polls, is because I think that's probably fair given, what almost everybody has coming back.
Brad, among the teams that have moved conferences this year, I'm thinking the ones that moved to SEC or Big Ten, so Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA, plus Texas and Oklahoma. Among those 6, Which of those do you feel is the most likely to have a Nebraska-esque welcome to the conference type moment where Nebraska, we saw it up close and personal firsthand that, hey, recruiting bases had to change, style of play had to change, and Nebraska didn't do the best adjusting with that, and I think the coaching hires are a part of that. But among those 6 teams moving to the Big Ten, the SEC this season, which of those schools do you think is most likely to have a rough welcome to their new conference?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, you ran through the teams real fast. I didn't catch all of them. I assume you mentioned USC in there as one of them. Yeah, and I can certainly see USC falling into that category. Now, granted, they were 7-5 last year, mm-hmm. So I don't think it would be that big of a stretch, knowing that they lost the number 1 pick in the draft as their quarterback, and they still lost 5 games with him. So, would it be all that shocking? But you look at what they had been playing for a schedule, and you say, okay, they're still. I'm just thinking about it off the top of my head. They have both LSU and Notre Dame out of conference, right? And then they've got the Big Ten schedule, and I don't have the schedule in front of me, so I can't recall whether they still play Oregon and who of the Big Ten teams that they catch and miss. The traditional Big Ten teams. But yeah, you could certainly see how the USC schedule is going to be a good bit tougher than what it has been, and obviously they've come up short in recent years with that. So I think USC is a good candidate to kind of have that wake up call. And hey, there were a lot of people when Lincoln Riley took the USC job, especially given the time that he took the job, said, hey, he's running from competition. He's running from the SEC because Oklahoma's making that move. And then USC ends up going to the Big Ten. And maybe top to bottom, the schedule's not quite as tough as it would be in the SEC, but I still think it's this Big Ten schedule is going to be much tougher than whatever he's faced thus far in the Pac-12.
I will just go out on a limb here and say his schedule's brutal because you start with LSU, you end with Notre Dame, you're at Michigan week 2. You host Wisconsin, you still host Penn State, you host Rutgers, you host Nebraska, and you got to go got to go. You're still got UCLA, which is a rival. There's a lot of coin flips, assuming your defense can be halfway better than it's been. It's Brad Edwards with us, Hail Varsity Radio. More from Brad on the playoff, the Big Ten, and what's he think of the Big Red?
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Brad Edwards with his college football insider. Hail Varsity Radio, the Gridiron and Gospel Pod with George Schroeder. Dynasty by the Numbers is Brad's book, at Brad Edwards on Twitter. What's acceptable for Georgia? What's acceptable for Alabama this year? Georgia's schedule, just to refresh, at Kentucky, at Alabama, at Texas, and they host Auburn, Tennessee, and Florida. It is absolute murder, but they're loaded. So what's good for Kirby this year, and what's good for Bama fans and Kalen DeBoer? He's a heck of a good coach, but, man, you're following a giant shadow. Yeah,
I think for Georgia, the 12-team playoff doesn't really change anything. It's still, they're in a position where anything other than a national championship is a disappointment. I see Georgia very much as where Alabama was for most of the years under Saban. After they got those first couple of national titles under their belts, then it's not to say that a one-loss season that doesn't end in a national championship is a massive failure. But it does mean that, that you're the best team, or certainly one of the 2 best teams in almost every season. And at least at this stage, anything other than winning the whole thing is going to be a disappointment for Georgia. And so I think, it's almost inconceivable that Georgia doesn't get into the playoff. And then once they get in, the expectation is that they win it. I think for Alabama, they also have that same expectation that they should be in the playoff. And I think if they don't, I mean, considering that Saban only missed the playoff twice when it was 4 teams, if DeBoer were to miss it in season 1 with there being 12 teams, I think that would be a failure. Even though, I mean, when you look at Alabama's schedule, look at their road games, just the road games, and you realize like this thing is rife with pitfalls as far as like you can easily see how if they don't get good quarterback play, they could go 8-4, but that's not acceptable at Alabama. And so I think the expectation is that they're in the playoff, and from there, I think so much of this is about the draw. And so whether we're talking about Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, whoever it may be, if you don't win the conference championship, there's still a chance that you could get a favorable draw, because this is one of the other things that we're going to have to get used to. It's not just the expansion of the playoff, but it's the idea that the top 4 seeds are not necessarily, and in most cases will not be the 4 best teams, because they have to be conference champions. And so there will be some years where, okay, if you're not the champion of your conference, let's say you're the second best team in the SEC, the Big Ten, you may want to be the number 6 seed or the number 7 seed, because you're on the opposite side of the bracket from the 1 seed. But at the same time, especially if you're the 6 seed, you could easily be playing a team, in that 3-6 game that's not as good as you. As the 6 seed, you could be favored. I think we will see that a lot, where the 6 seed is favored over the 3 seed, just because of the way that the seeding is working right now. So, I think to some extent, it's really just about get into the playoff. And once that happens, sure, you'd prefer not to have to play that extra game. But even if you do, I do think there are cases where you could get a pretty good draw.
It's Brad Edwards with us here. And Brad, before we get you out, let's flip gears here, talk some Nebraska. I want to get your thoughts, an outside perspective, a guy that doesn't talk about Nebraska every single day. What do you think the narrative is surrounding this 2024 Husker season? Matt Rule's in year 2. We've, around here at least, heard all the statistics about what Matt Rule does in year 2 of a football program. I want to get your thoughts on what's at stake for Matt Rule in Nebraska in year 2.
Yeah, and when I've looked at this a little bit, and I see the improvement from year 1 to year 2. Looking at Baylor, it was not a it was, I guess it was a significant jump, but it certainly wasn't something where all of a sudden they became elite, in year 2. The process still went on to year 3, but I think about, just from the Nebraska perspective, and I'm just going to tell you just kind of from a national standpoint, I think Nebraska is completely off the radar with the new teams coming into the Big Ten. I think there are even more people paying attention to UCLA just because they're a new face, and talking about some of that. People getting wrapped up in all this. Okay, well, you've got some of these weird games that are going to take place, like Rutgers and Maryland against some of these Western teams, and just look at the mileage and all that. And I think some of the teams, like a Nebraska, like a Minnesota, for example, even Iowa, which has been a pretty good team in recent years, at least certainly defensively. I don't know that many people nationally are really thinking about what was previously the Big Ten West. I think most of the focus is on the 3 big teams in the East. Your Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, and then the teams that are coming in, and mostly Oregon and USC. And what's that going to do to the conference? I don't think a whole lot of people are giving much thought to teams like Nebraska and everybody else who's kind of been around them in the standings in recent years, kind of looking at them as space fillers right now. But I can promise you, somebody in that group is going to surprise people. And I don't know whether it's Nebraska or whether it's going to be one of those other teams, but it seems like the odds are in favor of someone who's being overlooked, who might not have the recruiting profile of the top teams, is going to have a pretty good squad and is going to jump up and be in position to do something toward the end.
It's Brad Edwards with us here, Hail Varsity Radio. We'll wind down with Brad here in a moment. Real quick comment on the stream from Andy. Did anyone see Dennis Dodd's prediction? Says Nebraska will start 6-1, then lose to Iowa, but still have a chance to be in the playoff. Matt Rule wins Big Ten Coach of the Year? Question mark. Goes back to Andy Staples and his column from On 3, true or false. Iowa-Nebraska will be a game that has playoff implications. Totally believe that'll be true.
And in order for it to have playoff implications, that doesn't necessarily mean Nebraska is in a spot to be in the playoff, but can Nebraska be good enough? And this is something I've mentioned plenty of times before. The Average Joe Sports Show, I've mentioned it on this show. Like, my definition of Nebraska being relevant again is, are they in a place where they're playing November football games that matter, both for the Big Ten Conference, who's going to make the title game, and the college football playoff? Doesn't necessarily mean Nebraska is going to be a team that, with a win, is going to be into the college football playoff or whatever, but can they be at a point where they're good enough that the eyes of the college football world are on this game because, hey, Nebraska could sting Iowa, or Nebraska could sting USC? Is it a game that matters? Perfect. That's my definition for, is Nebraska relevant again? And I think Nebraska could be relevant under that definition this season.
Well, and they're good enough to be a threat to win it, and they're good enough to be somebody that's in that discussion. We'll wind down a fun Tuesday. John Baylor got us kicked off in hour number 2. Brad Edwards continues with us here to talk some college football. Big picture. Mitch Sherman was a party as always. We love Mitch in hour 1. Check the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Give us a rating with Hail Varsity Radio, Hail Varsity YouTube channel. We'll wind down a Tuesday next, powered by Cornhead Lager.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Brad Edwards with his college football insider. Brad, you've been around college football. You've seen some of the wow freshmen come in. Dylan Raiola is a guy that's super talented, but for his age, it seems pretty mature. He's a worker, a grinder. That's the mentality we're hearing, and we believe who we talk to. And, you're going to have your freshman mistakes. But, man, if you get a good freshman that is beyond his years maturity-wise, that can accelerate, because we all know that the problem was offense a year ago. The problem was offense, throwing the football, and turnovers.
And, we've seen it play out. Now, last year, obviously, was a little bit different in that I think Michigan, not to say that they were not a good offensive team, because they were good, but I think they were better on defense than they were on offense. And I think you could even go to Georgia 2 years before that. And Georgia 2021 was clearly better on defense than they were on offense. So when we've had these conversations in recent years, it was kind of like, okay, we finally flipped the script in college football where for so long it was defense wins championships, and then it looked like we got to a point where, you got to be able to get a few stops on defense, but ultimately now offense is what's going to dominate, and that's what ultimately is going to decide these championships. But it's almost like we've had a little bit of a regression, and I don't know, Chris. Like, to tell you the truth, like. Are we still in an era where you need to be, top 10 offensively in order to have a chance to be really, really good? And look, and I realize Nebraska's not a point right now where they're thinking top 10. They just want to get back into the top 25. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, obviously the potential is there, but I think it's kind of more of an eye on just improving and get to that point where you can feel really good about next year, which I know that's not what you want to hear at the start of a season, right? Yeah. Like you want to go into this and win as many games as possible. And look, I think the opportunities are there to get enough wins to have a good season. But when I look at a team with, what they have at quarterback, I'm like, yeah, they can make some progress this year. But I really see, more of a potential for having a more experienced quarterback next year, and then having year 3 of Matt Rule is where I would kind of more expect Nebraska to make some noise. So we'll see. But I don't think there's any question, that given, and I just talked about this with the SEC, and we know Nebraska in recent years, how many close games they've played and how many of those have not gone their way. But having someone who can make plays at quarterback can go a long way toward, just changing that. And the one or two plays that you hadn't been making, all of a sudden, if you are making them, that can be a big difference in that win column and that loss column.
Brad Edwards with us, College Football Insider, the Gridiron and Gospel podcast with Mr. Schroeder and his book, Dynasty by the Numbers. And find Brad on Twitter at @JBradEdwards. Brad, a lot of fun to talk some college ball today. We'll do it again here in season. Thanks for a few minutes.
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate you having me, and I can't wait to see some real college football this weekend. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, you and me both.
Can't wait for it. Florida State, Georgia Tech in Ireland. And we'll be back with more Husker Thoughts tomorrow with Hail Varsity. Take care.